Okay.
And Dr. Melissa Cast-Brede is here with us today to talk about young adult literature and the teen brain.
Yeah.
So I'll let you take over.
Okay. Well, I'm going to take, as I sort of introduce myself here, I'll see if I can share my PowerPoint, because you got to have visual aids, right, when we talk about teen books or any books. So I am, hopefully you can all see that, Melissa Cast-Brede from the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and I teach young adult lit. And it was actually at a workshop, I think 3 years ago, that Three Rivers organization led, where they brought in a woman to talk about the teen brain. But they brought her in to talk about teen brains in terms of behaviors and interacting with them. And I thought she was fascinating. And as I was listening to her, I kept thinking, well, that connects to this kid's book, or this teen book, or that teen book. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I could somehow show how the teen brain links to these books and maybe help us choose books or share books with teens, so we know how to talk about them in ways that they'll respond to them if we figure out what they respond to. So that's where this whole thing came from. If you want more information about it, I know we're supposed to do references at the end, but I just thought these were just some cool, easy to digest sources about this topic. So the National Geographic had a great article several years ago, the Teen Librarian Toolbox, which we all probably know and appreciate. They did a series on it that was very helpful. And John Green, the author, his brother Hank, has a YouTube channel called SciShow, and he did just like this short video about the teen brain, rapid fire delivery. Very funny, but it really kind of explained what's going on in the teen brain. And then lastly, the 57 bus, which is really about the true story of two teens who had an unfortunate encounter on a bus in Oakland, California. One teen is transsexual, and the other one was just a young kid who was with his peers. And one sets the skirt of the transsexual teen on fire. And so it's about what happened to them in the aftermath. But part of it talks about the teen brain. And like, why would he even think that was a good idea to do, kind of thing, and explain what happens in the teen brain. So there's a section of that that's really fascinating. So my thought is I'll give some background first about the teen brain, and then we'll talk about different aspects of what's happening in the teen brain. And then I'll pause and I'll connect it to some books, and then I'll just pause and see what books you guys can think of that you go, oh, wow, that matches up just like with this book that's really popular in my library, or something like that. So just kind of hopefully talk about books. So to start us off with, though, just to point out how many teens there are, so why it really matters that we pay attention to these books and these teens, is that 25% of our US population are teens. So that's a significant number when we consider the whole population. Now, in those teen years, they can either gain or lose 20 IQ points. So just in terms of the brain, and I'm not necessarily going to talk about hormones today, because I think that's a whole nother like 3-hour thing. This is just what's happening with the brain. And in those years, the susceptibility of them to potentially lose IQ points, or the possibility of them gaining it, is very significant. So in Nebraska, this equals about 250,000 teens in the state of Nebraska. Things they're dealing with, 46% identify as a person of color, and that number will keep growing. 10 to 20% identify as LGBTQIA+, although some people think it's higher than that. 1 in 5 are dealing with food insecurity, not having enough on their table. 1 in 6 of all genders will be victim of sexual violence before they're 18. And 1 in 4 struggle with a mental health issue. So there's a lot of stuff going on in their lives. At the same time, their brain is going through this huge change. The more change happens in the teen years than any other time in a person's lifespan except for the toddler years. So if sometimes you feel like that 15-year-old is being a 3-year-old, maybe they are, right? Because the brain is just changing so much. The myelin is thickening around the neurons, which makes them faster, but it takes a while. So in those early teen years and stuff, sometimes messages don't quite travel through that brain very quickly because the myelin is still just building up on the neurons. The dendrites are branching out in synapses. The more they're used, they get stronger. So for every new experience the teen faces, more dendrites grow. However, so if we keep giving them new experiences and they have repetition with them, those synapses will get stronger. However, if they just exposed once and never again, it's very likely that they will lose those dendrites or lose what they gained from that experience. Because every night when those teens are sleeping, you know how they seem to stay up late and want to sleep late and all this? Well, as they're sleeping, the dendrites that don't get used or synapses that don't get used, they're getting pruned away. So they're losing it. So that phrase, use it or lose it, really happens in the teen brain years. So that gaining or losing 20 IQ points, that's what's happening, is they've got to be using those synapses regularly to keep them strong, to keep them reinforced. Now the brain is changing, is growing, and this change is starting in the back of the brain. And it then starts making connections between the two sides of the brain. So do you ever feel like when you're talking to a teen, you give them a message and you say something and then the message just seems to go and keep going and never settle in their brain? That's because the brains, they're still, those two sides aren't necessarily talking to each other. So sometimes those messages just get lost in the brain somewhere because they haven't felt those connections yet. The thing that matures the last is the frontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex, and that's where all the reasoning is. So if we're frustrated because teens aren't reasoning or figuring things out, well, it's because that's the last thing to grow. It's the back that's really rocking and rolling. So that back part of the brain, that matures by age 15. But that's the section where it's emotions, right? This is where emotions, this is the pleasure center. So that's dominating the teen brain up until, for a long time. That prefrontal cortex doesn't fully mature till age 25. So the amygdala, the emotional pleasure-seeking center of the brain, is really ruling that teen brain for a long time before the prefrontal cortex catches up. So that impacts a lot of not only how they act, but what they respond to, what kind of things they like. Now, there's good things about this in that if they suffered some traumatic experience as a young child, because this brain is so elastic or plastic and can change, you can actually introduce interventions to the teen that can help them deal with what happened with that early childhood trauma that will keep them, won't hinder them going further in their life. You can really address it during those teen years. The brain's getting faster, it's getting stronger, they're more sensitive and empathetic. They pick up on what's happening in the world and they're really being sensitive and a lot of empathy is happening. They're quickly adaptable and flexible to new ideas, new things, and they're learning quickly. Think how much easier it is for them to learn language, for instance, than us. However, that sensitivity makes them very vulnerable to any bias that they feel that they're seeing or feeling themselves, and that could impact their long-term resiliency. This also makes them more impulsive, and they're easily distracted. Again, that amygdala is ruling, not the prefrontal cortex, which has concentration. So they're inconsistent, they're distracted, they miss social cues. Again, those two sides of the brain are not speaking to each other very well. They're just starting to learn to talk to each other, so they can't read social situations very well. They can't read facial expressions very well. So that's all the stuff that they're working on. Okay, so what does this relate to the teen brain? We can choose books and talk to them about books in terms that help respond to those neural changes. So for instance, if that amygdala and pleasure-seeking center is rock and rolling and that's dominant, we can respond to that. And so that's where they're seeking sensations, that pleasure center. So we want books that are, intense and exciting. Here's a quote from the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychology, and they talk about Hunger Games. And they think about Hunger Games, there's making a lot of comments, abstract ideas about consumerism, effect of celebrity on our society, violence, when do we go to war, leadership, all that stuff is in the Hunger Games. And normally those aren't things that we can think teens can process it. But according to this review, because Hunger Games is written in such an extreme fashion, such a sensationalized fashion, kids can access it. So this is all about novelty. It also means they want to meet new people. They're always going to meet this group or go with this group because it's new sensations. New people can introduce them to new things. And that's what, really the brain is responding to. They also value reward. And this is important. We think that teens don't realize that what they're doing is risky, or maybe they don't think anything will happen to them. No, they do understand there are risks. It's just the reward. They respond more to the reward. The reward is more important to them than the perceived risk. Again, it's because of the sensation-seeking part of the brain. They need that more than they fear the risk. They do fear the risk, but the other is more important to them. So when we think about books, we need books that have that intensity, that have those sensations that they can go through. And so last fall, I read The Last Voyage of Poe Blythe, maybe Poe Blythe, I'm not sure. But that first chapter, oh my gosh, I was exhausted by the end of that first chapter. It was love, and then there was hate, and then there was happiness, but then there was grief, and there was death, and their anger. Everything happened in that first chapter. It was just whiz bang action, plus all these emotions. So it was just full of sensation. And those sensations just kind of was a roller coaster throughout. She would relive the love, but then the hate that came because her boyfriend was murdered, and all this stuff came up and down, full of that sensation thinking. And it was a constant ride of that throughout the whole book. Now, sensation thinking is also looking at new formats and strange different formats. So they're open to those new things. We think about graphic novels and how popular they have become because it's part of that sensation thinking. David Elliott writes verse novels, and all the students I introduce them to come out of it going, oh, wow. But he really writes these verses in terms of the emotions that are happening. So Voices here is a fictionalized biography of Joan of Arc, of all people. And you wouldn't think Joan of Arc, who's going to read her? But it's the days before she's about to go and be burned at the stake, right? And so it's her talking about the injustice she sees. Remember, teens are very empathetic, so they see that and read about injustice, and they go, oh, they get all excited. But it's also format. So the voices in this are not just Joan of Arc's voices, but it's the candle in her cell that's with her. And see the candles in the poems in the shape of the candle, or it's the dress she got rid of when she changed into her army garb to fight. And the dress talks about the emotions of being discarded and left alone. And then trickled through this are the flames, the fire that's going to burn her. And it talks about how I can't wait to get to you and stuff like that. But all that sensation and building the tension until she goes to the fire is still that, it just grows and grows and grows. And that's the teen brain just loves that intensity. And then there was a book like Pet here, which I have a terrible time trying to figure out where I place this. I don't know if it's a fantasy book, if it's a mystery, it's a horror. It was an amazing book. Set in a future society, and Jam is a young transgender girl, but she lives in this future world that says they've gotten rid of all the monsters, that all the bad people in the world were taken care of by angels. angels in their community took care of the bad people. They don't have them anymore. Well, Jam's mother is a painter. And one night, Jam goes up to Mother's studio and sees this painting, and there's like razor blades in it. She goes to touch them, and suddenly she cuts herself and it bleeds. Well, that blood seeps into the painting, and out of the painting comes this creature with horns and claws and feathers. And this creature is here to find the monster. And she's like, no, the monsters are gone. And the creature says, no, there's a monster here. And I just was reading this book going, no, don't open the door, don't open the door. You know, there's all that kind of tension. Where's the monster? Don't look there. Oh, what if it's that person? You know, it builds. Again, that whole sensation thinking stuff is happening. What's going to happen next? Is it going to be them? Is it going to be that person? But also the emotions and the guilt and the fear going on with that. Who are the monsters in the world? And those are something teens can really relate to because they start realizing that there are monsters in the world. They're not just the artificial ones. They become more aware of what's happening in the world, and they can start seeing it themselves, and it pulls them in. I'm going to give you a chance to give your suggestions here in a second, but I also want to connect this to fantasy because fantasy is really popular with teens, right? Hugely popular with teens. And this is a quote from Lee Barduga, who writes the Krishna series of books, and she talks about why she thinks fantasies are so important to teens. And it's because fantasies are high stakes, right? It's always, you are the one who will save us. There's one character that will save them, humanity or the world or whatever is happening. So it's high, very high stakes. And that the teens feel like their daily life is high stakes, navigating all that social stuff in schools and not wanting to be the odd one out, or how do I do this and not get everybody mad at me, and all the thinking of my niece and all the drama in her life. It's really high stakes there. And fantasy reflects that, those sensations of high stakes and what they're doing. So fantasy, that's part of why fantasy is so popular with teens, is because it really speaks to that amygdala and all those feelings that they're having about life in school. Okay, I looked at my watch and I just talked rapid fire for about 15 minutes here. So as we talk about sensation seeking and books, what books do you think of that you've seen that people just go to because of the sensations, the intense sensations that they get from that?
Well, obviously, the Hunger Games. Back in the day, the Twilight series, too.
Absolutely. Right. Those are both very kind of, in some ways, intense for a young person. Hunger Games, Twilight.
Has anyone read The Children of Blood and Bone?
Yeah. I haven't yet. I've got it stacked up on my bookshelf, but I've got friends who just talked about it.
Very intense.
Yes.
And book 2 is out.
Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I better hurry up and read the first one then, hadn't I? Yeah, no, I would keep putting it off because it's thick. And I'm like, I've got these others I have to get through. But, you know, if it's intense, they'll plow through that thick book, won't they? Yeah. Any others?
That Hate You Give.
The Hate You Give?
Not really fantasy, but it's high energy.
And emotions.
I recommend the Neil Shusterman books, the Unwind Dystology, quite often.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of his books are sensation. Yeah, I almost put Scythe up there as an example. Yeah, very intense, a lot of sensations. Exactly. Okay, so another piece of those, especially like when you talk about the Hate You Give, some of the others is the social interactions. You know, with the Hate You Give, it was not so great social interactions, somewhat with the police, but there were other positive interactions in there as well. So that's one thing with peers, with teens, is social interactions are so incredibly important. And you see, I have that statement that says similar to oxytocin. They've done studies where they look at the teen brain and they compare the teen brain in interacting with peers and the teen brain on oxytocin, and it's like the same thing. It's like the same brain. It's like social interaction is like a drug for teens. And so they really want to see that. I remember when Harry Potter came out, and at the time I was an adult reading it. So I didn't quite get what kids were getting out of it, but I kept hearing them talk over and over again about the friendships. But that's what they loved about Harry Potter. It wasn't the magic, it wasn't the wizards, and it was the friendship between Ron, Harry, and Hermione. And the strength of that friendship. They really responded to that. And people, to this day, when I talk to kids and teens about Harry Potter, they're like, oh yeah, and that friendship. I mean, that's a big part of it. And so books like One of Us is Lying, it's intense because they're all being accused of murder. But in these 4 kids, all very different, in different groups within the school, suddenly have to come together and work together and get to know each other and navigate the secrets that they all have and work together to figure out who the real murderer is and what happens. But it's that social group working together and interacting. That's so important to them. Notice that I have in big letters there that peer exclusion is as dangerous as physical harm. So for the teen brain, being excluded and being isolated from the other teens is dangerous and damaging as physical abuse. And so there is this real need for that peer interaction. It offers the novelty that they want from sensation seeking. It gets them out of the house because they're starting to learn about, I've got to become an adult soon. So that's part of that transition. Teens represent the future. They know they're going to have to grow and they're going to have to be successful. They're going to need support beyond just family support. And so they're learning skills about how to interact. So books like this can help them learn to navigate those things. So for instance, The Weight of the Stars, on the surface, this might be science fiction, but this book is really about relationships. Ryan is an orphan. She and her brother are in high school. They're raising themselves, and they're sort of the leaders of this group of misfit kids. And then Alexandra comes to town, and she's all by herself. And the teacher says, you're not the greatest kids, but you're really good about hanging together and supporting each other. And this Alexandra is really alone. I think you should reach out to her. Well, Alexandra's alone because she is the daughter of a woman who was sent to space 18 years ago. There was a space program where they sent a group of 20, 30 women to space because they thought women could handle some aspects of space travel better than men. So they sent them out. Well, of course, one of those women was pregnant and gave birth just before she left. And Alexandra spends her nights trying to get her mother's signal, hoping her mother is sending a message through space, and she's trying to get her signal. And she becomes part of this group, and they pull her in, and Ryan and her become so close that it just turns into this love. But it's real. So this book isn't science fiction. It's about the relationships and learning how to build trust and getting people to trust you and how to trust them and what friendship means and what loyalty means. And so this group comes together to help her build this radio so she can maybe more potentially receive these messages from her mother from space. But it's the friendships working together to do this. And they're learning how to be that. What does a friend look like? Sometimes it's about seeing commonalities amongst different groups. Aurora Rising, totally sci-fi. We've got Tyler Taylor, and he's the leader of this group of cadets. He was the rising star in this space academy, And when he should have been at the draft picking his ideal team to go out in future missions, he's actually out in space rescuing this girl named Aurora. And by the time he gets back, all that's left is this ragtag crew. And he has to take this ragtag crew. Some are human, some are not, some from different planets. And there's all kinds of cultural missteps, you know, saying things to offend somebody else and not realizing it, not understanding these other cultures, seeing bias and prejudices. But this is a group, and the book is told from like the perspective of 6 or 7 different characters. So it's a lot of character switching as you're reading through the book, but you're seeing things from so many different eyes and so many different perspectives. And this group comes together and they learn to navigate those social awkward situations. And if you accidentally say something to offend somebody, how do you deal with that? And building trust again with each other. So they see again these people learning to navigate and learning to handle social interaction. And that's what Pier's teens are responding to, because they're figuring it out too. You know, how do you be a friend? What does a real friend do? How do we navigate these difficult situations with friends and drama and stuff like that? And so we see that in Aurora Rising. We see that One of Us is Lying. We see that in The Weight of Stars. And we probably see it in other books as well. Slight digression here. Unfortunately, there are teens who are kind of alone, aren't there? So even though that is very painful and it's damaging to them, it's even more important then that we have books to help them feel like they're not totally isolated, because we know how dangerous that can be for them. So we do find books and want to make sure we have books that they can respond to. On the left, I Wish You All the Best. The main character, Ben, is non-binary. And at the beginning, they come out to their parents. And we don't see this scene, but Ben is basically kicked out of their parents' house and left on their own. Ben reaches out to their sister, who they haven't seen in years. She walked out on the family, but it's processing what it is to be different than others and being rejected by those, and finding your place again and figuring out who you can trust and who you can't trust, and coming to terms with those feelings. On the right, What I Leave Behind is kind of a novel approach. It's 100 chapters, but each chapter is only 100 words. So it's a very short, quick read, but it's about Will, whose father has died. And he's dealing with the grief of that. At the same time, a childhood friend, he learns, was raped at a party that he was at. And so now he's got all the anger at that and guilt of, I wasn't there to help her. I wasn't there to protect her. I wasn't there to help my dad. And in these 100 chapters of 100 words, he kind of walks in his neighborhood and he processes this and figures out that even though in a way he's alone, he sees that he's not quite as alone as he thought. This also means social skills. And sometimes these kids are alone because they can't read social skills very well. They're socially awkward. They haven't learned how to act. And we probably can well remember those situations ourselves as a kid. They misread things. They think someone's being concerned. They think someone's disappointed when really that person's just concerned. They're still trying to negotiate things. Hooper was a great book. In fact, I just had a colleague in a school library says she's got extra copies of this so she can hand them out to certain students so they can learn from this book. But it's just about a young man, Adam, who was born in Poland. And in Poland, his family sort of fell apart. And he comes into the world of a woman, a researcher from the United States, and she sees him alone. His father has given up his parental rights, so she adopts him and brings him to the United States. And so he's, culturally, he's still trying to figure things out, kind of things like that. But his thing is basketball. He is an awesome basketball player. So he can succeed in some ways, but he's just not connecting with teammates. He's not connecting with friends. And then there's a young woman basketball player in the school who kind of says, dude, this is what's going on. People think you're conceited when really he's just aloof and doesn't know how to act. And so she coaches him along, and this is how you act in this situation, and this is how you act in that situation. And for teens, that's what they're trying to figure out. So this can really guide them. And so that school librarian I was telling you about, she's like, I'm giving it to the leaders in the school so they can help those other kids. And I'm giving some to those other kids so they can learn themselves as well. So the social interactions, sometimes these books are really helping them see, how do you navigate these things? Because they're not really getting that anywhere else. Okay. So I just gave my rapid file about some books that really talk about interaction and learning what it is to be a friend, and how to be a friend, and how to interact with other people. Did it make you think of any books?
The social isolation made me think of Speak by Lori Halsey Anderson, I think.
Yes. Definitely. She's totally separated out. Just because it was something that happened to her, not necessarily something she did. Right. Any others? You know what just occurred to me too, when we think about something like Speak, not only shows how she, the social isolation and how it happens, but it shows her learning how to deal with this and learning how to heal and taking care of herself so she could heal and become a strong young woman again, despite the trauma she experienced. So it really, shows, in a way, it's almost educational. I actually gave the book, the graphic novel version of that, to my dad, who's 82, kind of because he was curious about graphic novels. I'm like, well, this is the one I have. And he's like, wow, this was really educational. This really helps you see what was, So even I think for adults, it's helpful for that. Any others? Okay. I think sometimes as adults, this is harder for us to see because we kind of forget what it was like to try to navigate that stuff. Let's see. Oops. There we go. Emotions. If there's nothing that's not going on in the brains, if there's anything going in their brains, it's at least emotions. I mean, they are just back and forth with emotions all over the place, and they're about everything. I am not your perfect Mexican daughter. Julia is not her parents' perfect daughter. The perfect daughter is her sister Olga, but Olga is killed in a bus accident. And so suddenly all of her parents' expectations and what they expect fall on Julia, and Julia is not Olga. Julia has other ideas. They're not traditional that their parents expect. And so there's tons of emotion with the grief of losing her sister, but the anger about now I'm in this role that I don't want to be. And I don't understand you and you don't understand me. And we can all think of those teens saying that, you don't understand, you don't know what it's like, and all these emotions. And she goes to Mexico to live with her grandmother, and she realizes that, her parents were in the same place once that she is now. And so she goes back home, and she still has her goals and dreams, and she's being true to herself, but she's at a place of understanding now, and the emotions start finding their place, and they're motivating her further. Devils Within is a young man. I want to say, I think his name's Nate Will. He grew up in a white supremacist militia group. And at 14, he's able to escape, but in the escape, he murders his father. to get away. And he is now in the hands of social services who need to protect him because the white supremacist group is out to get him. But he also has very limited family. And the only family they can find is an uncle who wants nothing to do with him. So he goes to live with this uncle. And it's all the emotions and anger he has, having grown up in that society, but the guilt of it as well, and what he's done with killing his father, but also what he's done as a young man that the white supremacist group had him do to prove himself. So a lot of guilt, a lot of emotions going through this book, learning to trust his uncle, having his uncle learning to trust him, and finding a relationship together. His uncle had totally rejected everything that his family had done before. There's tons of emotions going in this book and constantly processing those emotions for a young man. The Hazelwood fantasy book from a couple years ago, her mother, Alice, is the main character. Her grandmother wrote this famous fantasy series set in the Hazelwood that has a cult following. But Alice and her mother have kind of grown up separate from that and tried to stay away from the fans and the fanatics. But that involved moving all over the place. And one of the things that happens is Alice's mother is kidnapped. And this book is about Alice finding her way to her mother because she's realizing that Hazelwood is actually a real place and that her mother has been taken there and that she has to go there to save her mother. But these emotions of helplessness, and she's angered at her grandmother, she's angry at this group, she's angry at the fanatics who have made her family hide and travel all over the place. Just this anger at the world is there. But also, an ultimate part of that is what was so beautiful about this book, was it was all about a girl's love for her mother. That when it comes down to it, as imperfect as her mother was, she was her mother and was doing what she thought was best for her, and this Alice trying to find her mom. I really kind of relate in a weird way this book to Harry Potter, because I think so much of Harry Potter is a mother's love for her son and what a mother's willing to do to protect her son. Oh, and then there's the emotion of guilt and not being the friend that they thought they should be. Patron Saints of Nothing, fabulous mystery set in the Philippines. Jay is a Filipino-American born and raised in the United States, but family used to go back to the Philippines to see relatives, and he was very close once with his cousin. And they lost track of each other, you know, it happens. But suddenly he learns that in his senior of high school, that his cousin is dead. But the family has sort of disowned him, so they don't acknowledge his death. They don't have a memorial. They don't talk about him. They don't talk about what happened. He finally figures out that he died of a drug overdose, which he doesn't believe. He thinks something else happens, and he goes to the Philippines to try to make up for those lost years and not being the friend his cousin needed, and to find out what happened to his cousin. Through it all is the guilt of, I wasn't there for him. I didn't answer his last letter. I didn't do this, but I'm going to do right by him now. And you go through and see the poverty of the Philippines, of Manila, and everything that's happening there now. But at the same time, it's ultimately about the friendship between these two cousins and the guilt over leaving him behind. Monday's Not Coming, another mystery in disguise. This comes across as a mystery. Claudia and Monday are best friends, have been all through elementary school. Now they're coming into middle school. Every summer, Claudia stays with her grandmother, but they constantly write each other. And when she comes back from visiting grandma, the first person she goes to see is Monday. Well, this year she goes and gets home, and Monday's not there. So she calls her, and they're like, no, Monday's not here. And they say, well, Monday will be at school. You'll see her at school. She goes to school. Monday's not at school. And she keeps trying to find out where's Monday. And people just keep saying, oh, no, she's living with her dad now. She's living at her aunt. She's not buying it. Something has happened to Monday. And she seeks out to find this. And as she does this, she's realizing and learning that Monday's life wasn't as great as she thought. And maybe she missed out on a lot of clues of stuff that was happening in Monday's life. Again, the guilt for not being a better friend, not seeing the stuff that was happening to her in her own home, and what she was going through and being a better friend. This was a beautiful book about friendship, the mystery of what happened to Monday, and the desperation of Claudia to find Monday, and the lengths she would do to find out what happened for Monday. But the emotions through the whole thing are just there, and when she gets brushed off by adults, the emotional response again is just there. And I think of these books and I look at them, and I have nieces who are in this 12 to 15-year-old range, and the emotions are just like palpable. And I've given them some of these books, and they talk about it in such emotional terms. Oh, I love this book and this, and I hated that, and I was excited when this happened, and just these big over-the-top melodramatic emotions that are coming out of these books. And these books, they just eat them up. And they're just dripping, the emotions are just dripping off the pages of these books. So when we think then about these emotions and emotional things, we've talked about Lori Halls Anderson's Speak. I mean, that's another emotional just roller coaster of exhaustion. But as an adult, I'm done with it. For a teen, it's exhilarating, right? So maybe what emotional books have you read, or that you see in your teen collections that you see your teens just like eating up? We may have mentioned a couple of them already.
I think it's called We Were All Liars, or We Are All Liars.
Yeah.
When you talk about grief.
We Were Liars. Awesome book. That's the teens I've given that to have read it in one night.
I have to say that's probably my least favorite book of any book I've read in my whole life. I hated it, but I can see all wrapped around grief and just a narcissistic main character, in my opinion.
Yeah. But every teen I've given it to has just loved it. But again, that's a teen brain. It's not our brain.
I had a discussion with one of our teen patrons, and the book was called The Female of the Species, and it was by Mindy McGinty, I think is her name. But it was about I think she was a high school senior. Her sister had been abducted and murdered, and they were pretty sure it was this guy in the neighborhood, but he got off on a technicality. So she has decided that she is going to murder him herself. And so I was just like, oh my gosh, that is so melodramatic.
Yeah.
I think I would love it.
Yeah, and they do. I mean, that whole thing is it's just like, oh my gosh, some of them just sob over it. This is just the most amazing thing. And it's just like it's fuel for them. And again, it's that amygdala brain. That's just like going like gangbusters, right? And that's what it really triggers, that part of the brain. And those synapses just go, doo, 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 and they get those emotions. Yeah. Okay, finally, tied in with that is their amazing empathy that these kids can, sorry, I'm going to watch the time here. I don't want to keep you too long because I know you're all busy. The empathy that they feel, that teens can really feel from each other. And we see this when we start seeing some of the activism out there. People are like, oh, these kids are just being crazy. This is their brains. They're being sensitive. They're being empathetic. This is how their brains are wired for them to be right now at that age. So books like I'm Not Dying With You Tonight, which is the most recent thing my niece just went nuts over in terms of them. She's like, oh my gosh, this was just, I can't believe he treated her that way. This book. It's told from two different perspectives of two young women from the same high school, but very different walks of life. There's Lena, who is the young woman on the left here, of African-American descent, has lived in the town her whole life. Very popular, very stylish. She's got an older boyfriend that she thinks is just so cool. He's not really that cool. And then there's Campbell on the right. She's just moved there from Minnesota. She's just getting to know each other, getting to know the town. But they both are coming with their preconceived ideas of who the other one is. They meet up during a football game at the high school one Friday night, and a riot breaks out. And they are stuck in the concession stand together. And if they're going to get out of this, they have to rely on each other to get across town. And they both bring something to, again, they both bring something to the table, but through this, they confront each other with some biases, some preconceived notions, and they learn a lot about each other through the course of this night as they navigate through the school, through this rough neighborhood, trying to get to where they're going. And so a lot of emotions, but at the same time, we see these two people becoming empathetic to each other, becoming sensitive, starting to stand up for each other and defending each other because they're starting to understand the other perspective. On the right is Jason Reynolds, and like, can the man do anything wrong when it comes to writing? I don't think so. Long Way Down was a verse novel, and it takes place after the young man's brother is murdered. And Will is there, and there's this line about blood, and when you see the blood of your brother, that's also the blood that runs through you, and you see it spilled on the sidewalk, that what that did. And his brother's been murdered, and he runs up to the 15th floor of the tenement building he lives in with his mom, and he finds his brother's gun. And the book takes place on his trip down the elevator. He's got his brother's gun. He's going to avenge his death. And the book takes place in the 60 seconds it takes for him to get on the elevator and then ride the elevator down. And at each stop, a different ghost from his past gets on the elevator and talks with him. And at the bottom, you don't know what he's going to do. If he's going to avenge his brother's death, or if he's not going to, because he understands the cost of violence. You don't know. But you gain such empathy for him from this ghost in his past and how he got to this point by all these different people and the roles they played in his life and the way he abandoned him, perhaps, the violence he's already seen. And you get to start seeing this other way of life. So there's great empathy that you feel for him and his plight, and you start understanding how he got to this point where he has a gun in his hand. One of the most inventive things, and I'm not sure I can do this book justice, The Assassination of Bragg Spurge, is this incredible, creative, ambitious telling about empathy and learning to see other people for who they are. It tells the story of two countries, two kingdoms, an elfin kingdom and a goblin kingdom, and they have been at war for centuries. And the book opens with the elfin kingdom sending an emissary, Bragg Spurge, to the goblin kingdom. And as you read through this book, it's half illustrations, half narrative text. And you start reading it, it's a little discombobulating because the story in the narrative does not match the story in the pictures. They're totally different. So the narrative is telling the perspective of one person, and the pictures are telling the perspective of the other person. So the other person is Werfel. He's an archivist from the Goblin Kingdom, so he's a scholar. He's just like this befuddled scholar. When Bragg first meets him, this picture on the right is who he sees. This is how he describes Werfel, this archivist scholar, the eyes and the teeth and this. And you see how their perspectives of the exact same event are different. And we see how the propaganda they've been fed over their lives is coloring how they see the other person. And by the time you get to the end of the book, we see that Bragwain's perspective or how he sees Werfel changes from this creature to this man on the right. That through getting to know each other and going through this adventure where they're both being chased by both kingdoms and all this stuff, they get to know each other and they get to see each other for who they are. So they gain empathy for each other. They realize all these stories and falsehoods are creating false images. And this is amazing trajectory of how the pictures slowly change and how the narrative slowly changes to become one. Just an amazing book. But for a kid, you got the sensation novelty piece of it, but also that empathy of, oh, starting to see who people really are. It was just amazing. It was just really an amazing book. So we're winding down here at the end. What other books have you read that really seem to help or would help develop empathy in teens and continuing that sensitivity to others' plights and help them grow as empathetic adults?
I don't know if anybody's ever read any of the Artemis Fowl books, but we're going to turn that into a movie coming up, I hear. And he kind of has to learn about a bunch of different creatures in that book.
Yeah, and he starts out as what?
He's pretty young.
He's pretty young. He's a snob. I love those books. He's a snob. He's a real. He's like Richie Rich gone bad.
Mm-hmm. Those are good.
Those are great books. And as you said, as he gets to know dwarfs and fairies and stuff like that, he starts realizing that his actions are having a negative impact on these other people and these groups. And he starts becoming a much more sympathetic character as he learns and grows. Yeah. Exactly. What I love about that book is that series is, he is your obnoxious, clueless 13-year-old preteen, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he grows and becomes so much as he grows into his teen years. So yeah, Artemis Fowl's, I think, a great example. Any others?
It's an older book. It's called Breathing Underwater by Alex Flynn. And it's actually written from the point of view of a young teenage boy who has been court mandated to go to anger management classes because of a violent episode with his girlfriend. And it's difficult to describe because you don't want to be empathetic for a violent boy, but it does not excuse his behavior in any way, but it kind of it helps you to realize why he might act that way or why he chose to act that way in that story. Yeah, like I said, when I first heard about it, I'm like, why would I waste my time reading a book about an abusive boyfriend from his point of view? But it is quite, you were talking about empathy and the heightened emotions that kid operated at a much higher emotional level. And it's a very good book.
I'll have to check that out because that sounds exactly like what we're talking about here. Yeah, is understanding that where people are coming from and how they got to where they are and stuff. Yeah, like you said, not excusing it though. It's very important that the books don't excuse it. Like The Devil's Within, you know, that white supremacist background, it addresses some of his, as he lets go some of the racism and stuff that he was built up in his system and how he got there. And it replays instances in his life as he reflects on how he got there. You don't excuse it, but I think you said it, that heightened emotional level. It's there, yeah. Okay. One thing I'm just going to finish with is getting back to those dendrites and synapses. So if you remember, what's reinforced is strengthened, and what, you know, if it's not used, they're lost. So there's just the idea of getting them to read, that IQ and growing that IQ or maintaining that IQ. If we can get them to continue to read, to do that, we have to have books that they will respond to. So whether it's the emotions, whether it's the action and sensations of it all, or the empathy, it's getting them to read so we build up those dendrites and those synapses. But as we're doing that too, we want to be mindful that we're also reinforcing other things, right? So what other messages are being reinforced there? And just to go back to the very first book I mentioned, The Last Voyage of Poet Life, you know, while all that stuff is happening, we're also seeing problem-solving skills being demonstrated. She figures out solutions. There's strong work ethic being displayed in this book. There's a STEM element to it because she's actually a young engineer. There's how do you develop trust and friendship amongst groups who are very different from you. There's empathy in their critical thinking as they start questioning what they've always been told. So all these things are also happening potentially in these books. At least it was happening in this book as well. So we're not only just getting them to read, there's other things that they're picking up on in these teen books because their brain is just so ready to receive that. We want to make sure we can keep reinforcing those to make those synapses strong. And they learn how to do these friendships and make that synapse strong, as well as the others. Okay, that's it. Any questions or comments or other thoughts?
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. I love talking about YA Lit books. So anytime you want to talk, let me know. Thank you for all your suggestions. I appreciate that. It makes it so much more fun than me just talking straight for the whole time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa.
You're welcome.
Well, I'm just gonna,
Tammy, are you going to have her slides on a thing?
can I
Are
get
you
your
gonna-
presentation, Melissa?
Yeah, you can. I'll separate. I have a few slides at the end that I'll separate out about middle grades. So I'll just, not to confuse anybody, let me take those out and then I'll send them to you.
Well, thank you. And I
You're
did
welcome.
record it, so I'll share that too.
Okay, great.
My grandchildren are 13 and 18, and I think I could learn a lot from those early slides when you were telling what the brain's doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I just found that so fascinating. Like I said, I'd go back and look at those, like that National Geographic article or that YouTube video where he explains the brain. I just think that made so many things so clear about when you're talking to a teen, you know, like telling them to clean their room and they have, and you go and you look at it. Well, it's like that prefrontal cortex that would figure out cleaning your room means this, this, and this isn't there.
I need that. I need it for my daughter and for my grandkids.
Yeah, I needed it. It was like the light bulb in my head went off. I went, oh, that explains a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
I
yeah,
need to share it.
Go back and look at those. Those are great resources. I found them very great. Yeah. Thank you.
And I had just a few questions for everybody who's still here. If you could tell me what you use for content filtering. I know Lori was looking to do some changes at her library and would appreciate hearing what everybody else uses.
Ah,
Hmm.
don't know about that now yet. Is
I'm
that-
sorry, I had the mute on. When you say content filtering, what do you mean?
Filtering that's required when you have E-rate.
E-rate. Yeah.
Oh, we use CyberSieve, which is basically kind of the very bare minimum of filtering. Because, you know, you want to have that balance of
Yeah.
freedom of accessibility to, and then also protecting your younger patrons' sensibilities. It was in place when I came to the library, and we just renew it every year. And it's basically, it's defaulted onto our lab computers. And then if an adult wants to disable the filtering, it's really easy. You just click on the little icon, you type in the password, and then the filtering is disabled. And then when that patron logs off, our system, when it reboots itself, reestablishes that filtering on there.
What did you call it?
CyberSieve.
CyberSieve. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What does
All
that
right.
cost you then?
I don't remember.
Okay.
It wasn't, I remember thinking, oh, that's quite reasonable. That's not exorbitant at all.
The one we were suggested to use was Content Watch, but it costs $3.30 a computer per month. So, and we've got 10 computers. So I don't know. I didn't know if anybody had used it or know anything about it. So I guess I'll have to do some more looking and stuff. We got to find something. So
Mm-hmm.
Lori, I did add that question to Tiny Library Think Tank.
I saw
So,
that.
okay, so maybe you can get some ideas there because that's kind of a
Yeah.
nationwide, I think.
Yeah.
Tammy, does what I have, because we're linked to the school, does that count then for our filtering for two of our computers?
Right, you use whatever the school uses then.
Yeah.
Right, and I don't know what it's called. I think it's pretty high filtering since it's for all
To the
students.
school. Yeah. See, we're
Now-
not connected to the school. So
Now for E-rate, is it going to matter that I don't know if I have any filters on the grown-up computers, but I do have through the school on the Macs? Does that
I think
matter?
I think as long as you have it through the school, I don't think that matters. You know, as long as you have something for the
That's
kids.
only for two
Okay.
computers.
Two
though.
computers. Yeah.
I have 4.
I don't know. That
Maybe
might.
I have to get something for the other 2.
Yeah, I would call Krista on that one. I don't know.
Okay.
Another question I had come up lately is, does anybody have policies for when kids play games that are maybe a little violent or shoot 'em up games? I know I have kids here play Roblox and it's,
Yeah.
oh, what weapon do you have? Or,
Yeah.
and it gets out of hand sometimes, but someone else has requested the information too.
Games
No,
on
we don't.
computers.
We don't have a specific gaming policy. I think just our general computer use policy is, don't look at porn, don't look at violence, don't,
Yeah.
And the thing is because when kids sign up to get permission to use the computers, the parent and the kid have to read through our computer use policy together and then sign basically a permission slip together.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is ever any issues, both parent and kid were aware from the get-go.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're up for accreditation this summer, and part of that is fixing up the policies and stuff, and maybe that would be a good one for me to work on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like it's more and more of an issue lately.
Yeah.
Sorry. And the last question I had is Lisa Mackey already sent me her interview questions that they have, because my library board is looking to replace me, because I think everyone knows, but if not, I'm going to be taking Eric's place as the executive director.
Yay!
Excuse me. But my library board's struggling what kind of interview questions to come up with. So if
Do
anybody
you
has-
have a library card at this library?
Number one.
Oh, so sorry. Yes, that's a good idea.
Have you ever been in the library?
Yeah.
Oh no, everybody's kind of shaking their head. No.
We lost Tammy.
Tammy.
Sorry, my cold is still getting the best of me. I am so sorry. So anyway, I'm just going to rattle off a few things that are coming up since we are a little over, but there's actually a Three Rivers Library System board meeting online happening right now. Summer reading program in Teen STEM is Wednesday, the 12th in Norfolk. Big Talk for Small Libraries is Friday, February 28th, and it's online. And there is the Transform Teen Services with Laura England Big and Sally Snyder. We're going to have at Pierce. Dawn is going to let us use her facilities. That's on Friday, March 6th. And then there's a customer service workshop in Fremont on Monday, March 9th. So just some upcoming things I wanted to share with everyone.
You're going to send that out, right?
Yes,
I don't write
will.
as fast as you talk.
Yes, I will send that off.
Now, on Wednesday, the 12th, for that summer reading program, is that the one that we've already seen?
No, these are new
Different one.
presenters.
Ah,
Yeah, so it would be beneficial to go again if you could.
okay.
I know
It's
it's-
different stuff.
Yes.
Okay. All right, I have to look.
Right.
Is it too late to get registered for that?
I don't think so, no.
You said it was March or Wednesday, the 12th?
Right. Next Wednesday in Norfolk, so.
Have preschoolers that morning.
Okay.
I can't give those to anybody else.
Well, they're fun.
They are fun, but I don't think there's anybody in my library that would want to do what I do.
Did
So
anybody have any questions or anything before we sign out?
Thank you for organizing the World Read Aloud Day. That was awesome.
Oh yeah,
Even-
we had a good time.
Wasn't she amazing?
Yeah.
And Oh, shame, shame on me. I did not have the record going, so I missed the first couple of pages that she read, but I did get the rest recorded. So
Yay.
I will send that off too. I thought she did so wonderfully.
Good. I would like to see that. I couldn't get away.
It breaks my heart. I missed the very beginning though, because what a neat presentation she did. So,
Thanks, Tammy.
you're welcome.
All right. Thank you,
We're-
Tammy.
Thank you
Gotta
to
go.
Melissa and you.
Yep.
It'll be
Congr-
great if I can understand my grandchildren better.
Congratulations, Tammy. We'll talk to you later.
Thank you. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.